Okay guys, so continuing week 4, if you were watching the last video, we were working on this problem. We didn't quite get to finish it up. If you remember, I only get 15 minutes for this free software that I'm using. So let's move straight ahead to finishing this really quick. So we had basically gotten to this point. We had taken our two fractions, which were both negative, and we were multiplying them together. So we knew our answer would be positive. We multiplied our numerators to get 364, multiplied our denominators to get 1,365. We saw that both the numerator and denominator contained a factor of 7. Right, in other words, what this means is that if you take 7 times 52, you get 364. If you take 7 times 195, you get 1,365. So these factors of 7 we were able to cancel out of the numerator and the denominator, which left us with 52 over 195. Now, what we can do from here is the number 13 is actually a factor of both 52 and 195. So let's go ahead and factor out 13 from both of these. So just so we can see, if we take 52 and divide that, clear, 52 divided by 13, we get 4. So that means that 13 times 4 is 52. And then also, if we take 195 and divide that by 13, we should see that we get 15. 195 divided by 13 is 15. So 13 times 15 is 195. Sorry, this is multiplication here. All right, so these factors of 13 that we find in our numerator and denominator cancel. So when we cancel out these factors of 13, we see that we are left with the fraction 4 over 5. And that, in this case, is going to be our final answer, as that cannot be reduced any further. So we get 4 all over 5. All right, so I just wanted to finish that problem up for us so we saw the final answer there. Moving on to our next problem, it looks like number 11 was one that we struggled with. 12 even more so, however. So let's start here with 12 so we can get in as many of these as possible. That's not number 12. Let's try it again. Here we go. All right, so for number 12, load. Here we go. It says perform the operation. So we can see here that we are subtracting two fractions. We have 13 over 30 minus 37 over 75. So let's clear our board. A new color here. So we have 13 all over 30 minus, and that was 37 over 75. Okay. So notice here, guys, that we are subtracting two fractions. If you are adding or subtracting two fractions, you have to have what we call a common denominator. Okay, sorry about that, guys. It probably looks a little bit weird on the video, but I made a mistake here, so I wanted to go back and make sure I corrected that. So we are finding our common denominator, right? Anytime that you are adding or subtracting two fractions, you must have a common denominator. So what is a common denominator exactly, and how do we find it? Well, basically what we're going to do is we're going to take all of the denominators in our addition or subtraction. In this case, there are only two of them. And we want to find the LCM, the least common multiple of these two values. All right, so remember that if you're trying to find a least common multiple, you pick the largest of the numbers. In our case, it's 75. And we just want to go through the multiples of 75 until we find a multiple that is also a multiple of 30. All right, so at the very beginning here, 75 times 1 is 75 itself, and that is not a multiple of 30, so we're ready to check 75 times 2. So what is 75 times 2? That is 150. So is 150 also a multiple of 30? And in this case it is. If we take 150, think 115, excuse me, think 15, and we divide this by 30, think 3, what is 15 divided by 3? That's just going to be 5. So 150 divided by 30, just going to be 5, right? Those are just a factor of 10 larger. Okay, so 150 is a multiple of both 30 and 75. It's a common multiple between the two, and in this case it is the least common multiple between the two. So what we want to do is we want to rewrite both of these fractions so that these denominators here are 150. So we actually use a little bit of a trick. So watch very closely here. Excuse me, I'm still on this. We need to go back to our pencil. Okay. So this mathematical expression up here is equivalent to, so we have 13 divided by 30. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this first fraction, 13 over 30, and we are going to multiply it by a number such that the value of this fraction does not change. All right, so what number can you multiply any number by and you get exactly with what you started? Think about that for a second. So you multiply a number by this number and you get exactly what you started with. And the answer is 1. If you take any number and multiply it times 1, you're not changing its value. All right, keep that in mind because we also want this denominator of 30 to become 150. And we saw that when we multiplied 30 by 5, we ended up with 150. However, we need to multiply the entire fraction by the number 1 so that the value of this fraction does not change. And to create a number 1, you just take any number and divide it by itself. So when we take 13 over 30 and we multiply it by 5 over 5, aka 1, we are not going to change the value of the fraction, but we are going to change the way that it looks. Right, we're going to want to do the same thing over here for our other fraction. 37 over 75. So we have the fraction 37 over 75. Right. And we want to rewrite this fraction so that it has the common denominator of 150. And we saw that that occurs when you take 75 and you multiply it by 2. All right, but remember, you need to multiply this fraction by the number 1 so that the value does not change. 2 over 2, this is the number 1. This is the number 1. So notice here, guys, all we're doing is we're taking our first fraction, 13 over 30, and multiplying it by the number 1. We're not changing its value. Minus. Our second fraction, 37 over 75, and we're multiplying it by the value 1. We're not changing its value. All right, so what we see here is equivalent to what we see here. All we did is we multiplied our two fractions by the number 1, but we did it very strategically, because now when we multiply, we have obtained our common denominator of 150. Remember, when multiplying fractions, we're going to multiply straight across. All right, and then let's go ahead and get out our calculators and see what we end up getting. So this is equivalent to calculator. So numerator times numerator, 13 times 5. That is 65. All over. 30 times 5, denominator times denominator. It's going to be 150, just like we wanted, minus 37 times 2, numerator times numerator, 74. And then finally 75 times 2, our denominator. Remember, the whole point of this was to get our common denominator of 150. Don't need to multiply that one out. Okay, so guys, I just want to show you really quick so that we all see that what we did here is multiplied our two fractions by 1, and we did not change their values. 13 over 30. What is that? 13 over 30. That is 73.56 repeating, and I'll bet you we'll get the same thing if we do 65 over 150. Did I do something wrong? What the heck? 13. Oh boy. 13 divided by 30 equals. Oh, excuse me. I typed something in wrong the first time. So 13 over 30 is 0.433, which we saw as the same thing when we did 65 over 150. All right, I apologize for that. So, moving on, we are now ready to subtract. We've obtained our common denominator of 150. So once you are ready to add or subtract, because you've obtained your common denominator, your answer to any addition or subtraction problem, for fractions at least, is always going to have that common denominator. So in this case, we're going to have this common denominator of 150. We only add or subtract your numerators. So in this case, we'll be subtracting our two numerators. 65 minus 74. 65 minus 74, that is negative 9. Okay, so the last thing we would need to do here, guys, would be to reduce our answers as much as we can. And I can tell that both of these numbers here have a factor of 3. All right. So we know that if we did 3 times negative 3, that would get us negative 9. And if we do 3 times 50, that would get us 150, right? Because 3 times 5 is 15, so 3 times 50 is 150. Notice here that these factors of 3 cancel each other out. So our final reduced, simplified answer is just going to be negative 3 divided by 50. Let's put that up here. Negative 3 divided by 50. And in the instructions of the problem, I'm not sure if it said simplify, so it might accept either of these answers, guys. Just want to check. Yeah, it just says perform the operation, so I think it would accept either. Good luck, guys.